Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this final session of Quispamsis Council for the year 2022. I am looking for an approval of the agenda, please. It's been moved by Councillor Luck and seconded by Councillor Olson. On the question. Seeing there are none, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Comments this evening. I would just like to take this opportunity on behalf of council and town staff to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Last night we hosted the World Juniors practice game between Finland and the United States, and what a game it was. The Qplex was just bouncing. It had a vibe that was second to none. We saw a game that was very exciting, and people came out in droves, and we certainly packed the place. So for all those, for the volunteers, for the town staff, to our Director of Community Services and her team, and our assistant or acting CAO, I'd like to thank all of them for all the hard work that they put into making this happen. And these things don't just happen. They take a lot of work, a lot of planning, and we had it here last night in Quispamsis at our Qplex, and it was a game that will go down in our memory books. So quite a legacy for us. Also, please bear in mind that as streets and sidewalks are being plowed and cleared, please be mindful of people that are walking and crossing the street. And also, if you have metal pegs marking your property from the street, please make sure that they are set back adequately so that our wing plows do not touch those. So we will move forward with tonight, and I will call upon Councillor Emil Olson to read the treaty acknowledgement and moment of reflection. Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Your Worship. We would like to respectfully acknowledge that Quispamsis exists on the traditional territory of the Wolastoqey, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq people whose ancestors, along with Passamaquoddy tribes, signed peace and friendship treaties with the British Crown in the 1700s. We would like to take this moment to pay respect to the elders, past and present, and the descendants of this traditional territory. We would also like to take this moment to reflect on our solidarity and support for the people of Ukraine, acknowledging that Canada has the third largest Ukrainian population in the world, behind Ukraine itself and Russia. And may we remind ourselves of the important work we have before us tonight. May we make good decisions without prejudice or bias, and always in the best interest of our community, which we are here to serve.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. Moving on to disclosure of interests. Are there any disclosures this evening? I don't see any. Moving on to number 5. We have a public presentation, 247 Hampton Road, rezoning application, proposed medical clinic, residential R1 to central commercial CC. I don't know, says here that we were to have Dr. Natalie Graves and Dr. Monica Graves with us this evening. They are not here, so we will move forward with the presentation. Okay. Okay, Deputy Mayor Scryer.
Yes, Your Worship, I'm prepared to put a motion forward that a public hearing date be set for January 17, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers of Quispamsis Town Hall. The proposed zoning change be referred to PAC for its written views, and the property owners within a 100-meter radius of the property.
Thank you. It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Scryer, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question. There are none. Please vote now. Councillor Miller, is your motion? Motion carried 7-0. Thank you. Item number 6, public hearing. Proposed zoning bylaw number 038-41, introduction of development permits. In attendance, planning staff, Dwight Colburn, municipal planning officer, and Jennifer Jarvis, planning technologist. Good evening, Mr. Colburn, and welcome. And I will hand the floor over to you when you are set up.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, councillors, staff. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to present regarding a proposed zoning bylaw amendment number 38-41, an amendment to introduce development permits into the zoning bylaw, as well as to address a couple of housekeeping items. So I have a few slides to go through to give you some background and to look at the proposed changes. So the topics of discussion or for the agenda will be introduction to development permits, why now, and then some housekeeping items. We'll look at surface drainage, drainage elevations, development officer approvals, garden suites, also known as coach homes, and some changes to the bylaw with respect to cannabis in light of a directive from the province. So when it comes to permitting within a municipality, the legislative authority comes through the Community Planning Act. So the Community Planning Act provides the municipality with the authority to issue permits. Up until 2020, the Community Planning Act also included the authority to issue building permits. There was an introduction of a Building Code Administration Act, which removed references to a building bylaw and the building permit in the Community Planning Act and set it into a different act. In addition to that, what it did was it regulated in terms of the issuing of building permits that they could only be issued with respect to anything under the National Building Code of Canada. So what it left in terms of the municipality was sort of a gap that we need to address in terms of issuing permits for those items that do not fall under the National Building Code in terms of the Building Code Administration Act of the province. Also, through local governance reform, what's being introduced is minimum land use planning, development, and building services. This recognizes that all municipalities in the province need to follow at least and provide a minimum level of planning services as well as development services. And this will include the issuing of building permits as well as development permits. So the mechanism that we currently have in Quispam is building permits. And building permits are issued for dwelling units, commercial and industrial developments, institutional developments, change of use, general land development, accessory buildings, swimming pools, fences, decks, and detached garages. In addition to the building permit, when we look at dwelling units that are part of a subdivision process or commercial or industrial or institutional, we also have a development agreement process. However, while that provides another mechanism to control development, in some cases it becomes difficult to apply and to manage. So into 2023, what will happen is because building permits can no longer be issued for things that don't fall under the National Building Code, we're essentially down to dwelling units, commercial and industrial and institutional developments that fall under the National Building Code. So building permits that would no longer cover accessory buildings not intended for overnight accommodations, including detached garages, a building with a total gross floor area not greater than 56.08 square meters or 608 square feet, intended for overnight accommodations. Fences, pools, and swimming pools and decks, general land development, and change of use. So these are sort of the items that will not be covered under terms of a building permit. So we need a mechanism to be able to permit and to regulate these types of developments. So in closing the gap, we're proposing the introduction of development permits to address that gap that's been created with the Building Code Administration Act and the change to the Community Planning Act. Development permits, what is a development permit? Why are they used for and why now? So development permits, again, is a permit that's allows the town or provides the town with a mechanism to regulate and to provide consistency, if you will, in terms of those items that are constructed or land development that happens that are outside the realm of a building permit. So it allows us to provide consistently, it allows us to provide a level of standard, which ultimately will provide, fall in line with the municipal plan, the zoning bylaw, and land use development policies and bylaws. In terms of why now, I think I've covered that in terms of there is a gap and we need to address it. So in terms of the permitting process, what will ultimately happen is in terms of accessory buildings and fences and decks, pools, swimming pools, change of use, general land development, there's going to be a development permit application that is submitted to the planning department, and then once the permit is issued, construction can start. For dwelling units, commercial and industrial developments and institutional developments, there is a development permit that will look at it in terms of its compliance with the municipal plan, zoning bylaw, and any other applicable land use bylaws. So as I mentioned, if it's a dwelling unit or residential development, the subdivision bylaw would be applicable as well. So a development permit would be issued to certify that it meets the standards or the requirements of those land use documents. And then in terms of the actual residential component or any component that falls under the National Building Code of Canada, then a building permit would be issued as well. And then construction can commence. As I mentioned, if we still have the mechanism of development agreements, that will still remain in place as well. Are development permits new to the province? No. Are they going to be new to Quispamsis? Yes. Are they being done in other jurisdictions? Yes. So right now, some of the other jurisdictions that have development permits are Moncton, Riverview, Hampton, Rothesay, St. John, Grand Bay, Westfield, and the local regional service district. So we're essentially coming in line with what's the process and the permits that are already established in other jurisdictions and local governance within the province. So when we look at the 10-year trends, the question can be why, what does this provide to the town? And when we look at it in terms of building permits. So you can see in the chart, development permits, there are a significant number of items that would fall under development permits, as well as building permits. So there is a trend. So over the past 10 years, there's obviously an increase. There's a trend line that's moving upward. So there isn't a decline, if you will, in the need for development permits to address those structures or those items or that development that would fall out of a building permit process. Obviously, that would be reflective of the growth in the community, the lifestyle of the community, and so we're ensuring that we have a mechanism in place, again, that provides that standard and maintains that quality of life that we strive to offer in the municipality. So 10-year comparison, so there's about, when you look at the number of permits that are issued in total, of the total number of permits issued, there's about 60% of them are actually in terms of development permits where that sits. In terms of a revenue sort of line, obviously building permits provide or generate more revenue than what we would look at in terms of development permits. So the question becomes, when we look at the comparison of the actual dollar value that brings forward, what's the benefit to actually bringing in development permits? So again, development permits is about 5% of the total, I guess, revenue or in terms of the monetary contribution to the municipality, but it also provides and leads to increases in property assessment values, which comes back around through the tax process. So why should we care? Development reviews make good neighbors. So we look at, again, the standards. We aim to make sure that people are developing their own properties. They're not building structures on somebody else's property, which obviously creates good neighbors and provides for a quality of life. We ensure that there's a standard that's being maintained so things don't become unsightly. And there's obviously a safety issue as well that we look at. It falls in line with our strategic plan in terms of our guidelines. One of those things is to create a sense of community and quality of life in Quispamsis. So we look at it from a planning perspective that these items obviously add to the quality of life in terms of development of properties. And as mentioned, it improves and increases land values. So it gives us a mechanism to be able to track the types of developments that are happening, and that information obviously gets relayed to various stakeholders, such as the province, CMHC, those types of stakeholders. Impacts to the community in terms of the actual amendment to the bylaw, the zoning bylaw with respect to the development permits, we're going to try to make it as seamless as possible. So to the general public, we're going to look at the applications and the actual submission process would be similar or pretty much the same as what you see now for a building permit. The title and those types of things might change, but in terms of the receipt and coming through the process, it will remain the same. The changes in the back end between planning and building inspection. Accessory permit fees will remain the same. So again, to keep things as seamless as possible. There are some changes to the fee schedule with respect to residential development permit reviews because now there is that extra, if you will, level review, as well as to non-commercial development reviews as well. Some housekeeping items. Again, quickly we'll run through surface drainage, building and driveway elevations, development officer approvals, garden suites, and cannabis. Surface drainage, we're simply reintroducing a provision that existed in a previous bylaw. In the previous version of the building bylaw, it actually stated that we couldn't direct drainage onto adjacent properties. While in principle, we continue to look at that when we receive applications, we needed a chapter and verse, if you will, in a bylaw that we could cite in the case of being challenged in the rationale behind that. So we're simply reintroducing a provision that was in a previous bylaw and for some reason was removed from the current version, so we're bringing that back. Again, good drainage makes for good neighbors. Driveway elevations. So in the zoning bylaw, it states that if the finished floor elevation of the main floor of a main dwelling is 1 meter below the street, then you need a hold harmless agreement, which basically says that you have to ensure that surface water and drainage is directed away from your structure. And it also looked at the actual elevation of driveways. So when you set further below the road, making sure it was maintained and there's access to emergency service vehicles. So ensure public safety. That process has to go through the Planning Advisory Committee. So to streamline what we're looking at doing is bringing it into the development officer process, into the planning department to grant those approvals. Because what we found, the conditions that were being recommended by the Planning Advisory Committee were pretty much the same on each application. So in the interest of efficiency, we're looking at bringing that into the development officer process. That is provided for in the Community Planning Act. So the Community Planning Act does grant the development officer the right to grant certain variances and approve certain elements with respect to deviations from the zoning bylaw. So we're also looking at, in terms of it, when we look at the percentage below, we're looking at it above as well. So whether that's a negative or a positive grade, we have to apply the same principle. Okay, so when you get into elevations that are recommended in consultation with our fire department, when you get into excess of 10%, it becomes a challenge to get a emergency vehicle, fire trucks, and those types of things to be able to address the safety concern. So as mentioned, some of those development officer approvals that we're bringing forward with respect to building and driveway elevation variances, waterfront properties and developments adjacent to a watercourse. Again, the provisions of the current bylaw require any development within 30 meters of a watercourse or a wetland, or in general, waterfront developments have to go through the Planning Advisory Committee. Generally, what they recommend is that you go talk to the province to get a wetland watercourse alteration permit. It was pretty standard. So again, in the interest of efficiency, bring it back to the planning department and development officer and bring forth those standard revisions and allow the development officer to grant approval in the interest of efficiency. Key item to note is if there's an application that may require or maybe somewhat contentious and you feel that this is something that should be brought forward to the Planning Advisory Committee, the development officer has that authority. So they can look at the application and feel that it would be in the best interest that it go to the committee to involve obviously more members to have a review. The development officer has that authority to do so under the Community Planning Act. Garden suites and coach homes. So in the municipal plan, we've made provisions to provide alternate forms of housing. One of those items that's in the municipal plan is what we call garden suites or coach homes. We're essentially smaller dwelling units that are located on a property that already has a main dwelling. The intent is that they're located behind the main dwelling and they share services. So whether that's sharing water service, sewer service, and also power would come from the main dwelling itself. As it currently stands, there are no provisions in the zoning bylaw. What we've defaulted to is the Planning Advisory Committee. So what the municipal plan says is that council, through the municipal plan, would like to introduce this type of housing. And it said in the municipal plan that approval of garden suites or coach homes would be at the discretion of the Planning Advisory Committee. So that's what we've been doing. What we found is that the conditions that the Planning Advisory Committee have been establishing have been fairly consistent. So what we want to do now is at least get some provisions in the zoning bylaw as a minimum level to be able to look at the applications as they come in, again, and to provide guidance to those people who would look at or are interested in providing this style of housing on their property. Again, this is the initial framework. In 2023, council will have an opportunity to do an interim review of the municipal plan, which will actually trigger a review of these types of revisions as well. So this is an initial introduction to it into the zoning bylaw, and then there'll be an opportunity to look at it further as we go through. So it's a response to the different needs of housing in our community, and again, with increasing popularity for aging in place. In terms of cannabis, as we all are aware, with the legalization of cannabis, the province introduced it in terms of where things can be located in terms of the cultivation of cannabis as well as retail sales. On the initial introduction of it into the province, what was found, there was some discretion between where municipalities were approving the cultivation activities. Some municipalities were interpreting it as being agriculture, while some other municipalities were interpreting it as being an industrial activity. What the province did was to address some of the concerns that were coming their way, was they put forward a directive that required municipalities to amend their zoning bylaw to permit cannabis cultivation only to occur in industrial zoned areas. So in this particular case, we're introducing that into our zoning bylaw in response and following the directive of the province. So it addressed, again, a provincial directive, production facilities, and where retail sales can be located. In terms of resale sales, just a side note, there are actually no legislative provisions that establish where they can be located. As we all know, the sale is governed by, it's under the province, but in the RFP that was issued for the development of the cannabis in NB outlets, it stated that the setbacks had to be at least 300 meters away from residential properties and 150 meters away from schools and daycare facilities and those types of things. Municipalities have been using that guideline, if you will, in the RFP. It's our understanding that those provisions will actually be introduced into future legislation at the provincial level. That is an overview, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. I want to ensure that people understand that this is a public hearing this evening, and that we have been requested to and plan to consider amending zoning bylaw 038, and that today has been set aside for this public hearing. We will ask anyone online or present who would like to speak for or against the proposed amendment. They can do so now, and that we will hear also from council. I don't know if anyone is here and wishes to speak for or against the proposed changes. They may come to the podium. So we've had the public presentation. Yes, I'm just getting there. So those wishing to speak for or against the proposal may come forward to the podium to be heard. If you would like to do that, sir, you're welcome to come up.
Thank you, I just came to listen.
Oh, you came to listen, okay. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this proposal may come forward. Anyone wishing to speak for or against the proposed amendments may come forward. At this time, we can ask Mr. Colburn to make a final summation. Go ahead, Mr. Colburn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just, I guess, some additional information in terms of the process we followed. On December the 8th, planning hosted a open house that provided an opportunity for the public to drop in and ask any questions and sort of get some more further information on the proposed amendment. That open house ran from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And it was attended by, I believe, 6 individuals. So we had an opportunity to address some questions and provide some additional information, copies of the proposed amendment, a brochure of the changes and those types of things, as well as there was a direct email out to, I think, in excess of 100 direct contacts in terms of developers and builders to put them to notify of the proposed amendment. So there's been, I think, ample public notice in terms of the process. And we do appreciate those people that took the time on December the 8th to come out and engage in the opportunity to get more information. As indicated, we are bringing things in line with other jurisdictions. We have referred to their bylaws and their processes to assist us during this process. So it's not something that's out of the ordinary. We're simply bringing the municipality in line with other jurisdictions and obviously following the requirements and trying to bring the municipality into alignment with the requirements of the province as we move through local governance reform and as well as changes to the applicable acts. So we're going to aim to make this as seamless as possible to the general public and increase efficiency, recognizing that development is not on the downswing, it's on the up and up. And I think with the focus on bringing increases in immigration and increasing our population, I think we need to position ourselves to be open and provide opportunities for growth and development. And I think this is what these types of changes will do moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. At this point, we would have the PAC's written views to be read, please. Councillor Luck.
Thank you, Your Worship. Will the council have time to ask questions after this?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the next item
Okay,
after
perfect.
the PAC views are read.
Thank you. Okay, so notice of decision. So take notice that a decision of the Quispamsis Planning Advisory Committee was rendered in the matter of your request pursuant to the provisions of the Community Planning Act of New Brunswick. Matter requested, council has requested the written views of the Planning Advisory Committee on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment number 038-41, an introduction of development permits and general housekeeping items pursuant to section 110 of the Community Planning Act. 2, date, place of consideration of request, date December 13th, 2022, Planning Advisory Committee meeting, council chambers. 3, decision of committee, that the Planning Advisory Committee support council with the proposed zoning bylaw amendment number 038-41, an introduction of development permits and general housekeeping items with the following considerations. 1, staff to revisit the definition of reasonable in relation to the variances that a development officer can approve. And 2, staff to revisit the definition of repair in relation to when permits are required for property owners doing maintenance on their home. Dated this 15th day of December, AD 2022, and submitted by Violet Brown, the Secretary of the Quispamsis Planning Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Luck. At this point, we can have council members ask questions of Mr. Colburn. And after that, we can have a motion that could be presented and voted upon. Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Colburn, for your work on this, I guess, all the bylaw changes. I just have 2 questions. One actually, ironically, was brought up from the Planning Advisory Committee as well, and I just wanted some clarity on that. In regards to 3.1b, I'm just trying to find it here, where it talks about the development officer may consider fit, the development officer or their delegate may permit a reasonable variance from the requirements referred to in subsections, blah, blah, blah. And my question for that is, it sounds a little subjective, and I'm just wondering within that, what's in place to ensure consistency and objectivity from, application to application so that, it's not the person kind of reading them. It sounds like there's a little bit of wiggle room based on what's written and what we're going to allow. And I'm just wondering what processes have been put into place so that everyone has consistent, objective kind of approaches when that happens. So that's my first question. And then I guess I'll say both of them and then, okay.
Let's allow Mr. Colburn to
Okay.
answer that question, and we'll go back to you for a
Okay.
follow-up. Thank you.
So, under the Community Planning Act, it outlines when it refers to variances, through you, Your Worship, in terms of when variances are considered, and discuss three sort of criteria, whether it's reasonable, desirable, in terms of desirable of the development, as well as is it in keeping with the intent of the municipal plan and zoning bylaw. So that's sort of the criteria that we look at. There is a process. So when an application comes in requesting a variance, the development officer or the planning advisory committee has the right to go out to the public. So you can actually put public notice out to the adjacent neighbors. And the way that basically the policy sets is we have two ranges. So for things like a fence setback or accessory structure setback, because the initial impact would be on the adjacent property owners, we send out notice to them to get their feedback. If it's home occupation or something of a larger scale, then we send out notice to 100 meters. So we basically engage a larger area, which is in keeping with the notification process that we follow for zoning bylaw amendments. So the question that came from Planning Advisory Committee was what's reasonable. So we have a process in place, and we will continue to follow that in terms of engaging, and communicating with adjacent property owners and stakeholders. The other item that we're going to look at, and some municipalities do, is they provide a percentage range. So in some cases they go, if the variance being requested is within 10%, 15%, then the development officer can just grant it. If it's over 15 or 20%, then the recommendation is that it go to the Planning Advisory Committee. So that's something that we're going to look at to possibly bring in to sort of address that of what is reasonable, to provide just a little more level of consistency in terms of that process. So that's what we're looking at, and that was the question that came from the Planning Advisory Committee. So again, we look at it in terms of the Community Planning Act, which says reasonable, desirable, keeping with the intent. We engage people that would be impacted to get their feedback. All that's taken into consideration, and the other levels we're looking at some possibly introducing percentage levels of what would trigger the need to go to Planning Advisory Committee as well. So that's where we are.
Thank you, and you had a follow-up, Councillor Luck.
Thank you. And my next question is in regards to 6.FF around the cannabis. And I realize that these standards are standards that are guidelines that have been used. And we're suggesting that retail should be at least 300 meters away from a daycare and school. And these are the bare minimum standards. And I appreciate the fact that they're just standards and that's what the norm is. And I guess since we are going through the process of developing this bylaw, 300 meters doesn't seem like it's a very far location if you're looking at denormalizing cannabis use with youth. So, again, when I'm thinking about, a bylaw that potentially, could affect, kind of the feel of our community, I'm just wondering if 300 meters is far enough from a daycare and a school. And I know that the norm is 300, but we don't have to actually do the bare minimum. We could actually be leaders in it and say we want it to be a little bit further away. So we, take active steps to denormalize cannabis use amongst our youth. So I guess I put that out there because I do feel like 300 meters is really a stone's throw away from a school or a daycare. And I don't know if I'd want to have a retail store that close to where our kids play or learn. So that's.
Thank you, Councillor Luck. Mr. Colburn.
Through you, Your Worship. So as I noted, the actual numbers that were presented and other municipalities are using came from the RFP process in terms of the province when they were looking to construct their retail outlets. Currently, it's my understanding that these retail outlets are still sort of governed and regulated by the province. So they would obviously have to consult or follow municipal bylaws, which is a change under the Community Planning Act through local governance. So that is a bare minimum standard. It's obviously a direction of council whether they feel that should be increased. Again, we would be looking for direction from the province in terms of that's what we would consult to. The other item to note is that when we look at the fact that in terms of cultivation of cannabis is being forced into a light and industrial zone, we have one industrial area in Quispam. It backs onto residential properties. And if the requirement is to have it within, I think it's 150 meters, in essence, cultivation facilities in Quispam would be extremely limited. Off the top of my head, I'm kind of thinking, I'm not certain that it could happen in the light industrial zone that we currently have. So we would be simply restricted to, in terms of the guidelines at this stage, retail outlets. And again, 300 meters is what has been presented, and that's what we're proposing. And it's my understanding as well is that that's would have been what other jurisdictions across the country that the provincial government would have referred to when they introduced the RFP. So again, I guess we would need to step back and look a little further in terms of if the desire is to increase that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Moving on to Councillor Bigger, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks very much, Mr. Colburn, for all this. Just in the draft of the revisions under 6F about elevation of new structures and residential driveways, just a couple of questions I had quickly about that. Do you have any sense of what, ballpark percentage of new structures, new residences that are built currently exceed that 10% grade rule that is part of this draft, above or below, I guess, the center line, or rather exceed it, is it something that is a common issue in terms of, no, yeah. And you mentioned about best practices with other jurisdictions, and I just wonder, is the hold harmless policy, is that a common sort of application in the case of variances being applied to exceed that percentage, sort of restriction? Or are we unique in that way?
Thank you, Councillor Bigger.
Through you, Your Worship, there are other jurisdictions that use a similar type of agreement. It basically takes away the liability from the municipality in terms of if there's damage in terms of stormwater and those types of things that come off of a public street. Obviously, our designs for public streets and those types of things can collect and convey the water through public right-of-ways and easements and those types of things. But in the event that something were to happen, they recognize that water can go down the driveway and then have an impact. So it basically it allows the property owner to recognize that that is the risk, and they're willing to take that risk. So no, we're not alone in terms of those types of arrangements, and it's something that the municipality has used for quite a number of years. So I'm going on to my 19th, 20th year or something like that. They've been around since then, so it's been a mechanism that we've continued to use.
Thank you. Moving on to Deputy Mayor Schreier, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Colburn, for your presentation. I guess I just sort of want to go back to the start of this and how it all started, that we were doing these amendments because there was a change to the National Building Code. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the changes in the National Building Code that the province adopted, and then that left the gap. So I guess I'm a little unclear as to why the province would adopt the National Building Code with great, I guess, celebration when it was announced a year or so ago that there were changes to the National Building Code. And now municipalities are put in the situation, well, now we have a gap. So is it necessary to fill the gap according to the province, or is the province leaving that up to every individual municipality? That's my first question.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So just to, I guess, clarify, and I apologize if it wasn't clear in my presentation. So the change that we're bringing forward is because of a change to the Community Planning Act of the province, not the National Building Code. So the, the, the Community Planning Act was the legislative authority to allow you to have a building bylaw and building permits. The province introduced a Building Code Administration Act, which removed those provisions from the Community Planning Act. So it's not a change to the National Building Code, it's a change to provincial legislation with the creation of the community, with the creation of the Building Code Administration Act. So what happened was the provisions in the Community Planning Act as it relates to the building code were removed and put into its own act and regulations. And it also said that building permits can only be issued for things under the National Building Code. So as I mentioned, there's a minimum planning and development service standards that provides for that building development permits provide for, and that's what other jurisdictions do. So like existing jurisdictions, Moncton, Riverview, they use development permits for items that aren't covered under the National Building Code. Okay, so we're certainly bringing the municipality in line with the requirements under the changes. The reason they did that was so that they could actually adopt changes to the National Building Code more efficiently. So the province is essentially somewhat behind in terms of the actual National Building Code that they've adopted. By removing it and creating their own act and regulation, it allowed it to be a more efficient process for the province as a whole to adopt the National Building Code changes. So that's sort of what's driving this, is changes to the Community Planning Act. We have to align with.
Clarification, because I thought it had to do with the National Building Code had changed, and so that we were trying to so the National Building Code changed, or it was the Community Planning Act that actually changed?
Correct.
Okay, so, okay, that clears that up. My second question has to do with the garden suites, and so it's my understanding that we don't currently have any bylaws for garden suites, and so this is sort of a template to get us started. So the reason I bring it up is because we've talked about housing a lot and about what our housing needs may be in the community, and I just didn't want to get us cornered into a certain bylaw that we may want to change. 5 months down the road, we get a community or a housing committee together and they start reviewing these things. They determine their mandate, the policies that and what their mandate's going to be, much like we did the active living committee, the mandate that they had. That's what I envision with the housing committee as well. So I just want to know that we'll have the opportunity to revise these accordingly in the future. Because I have a lot of questions about it, and I just didn't want to get into all the questions tonight if there's an opportunity to change things.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So, yeah, so right now the provisions is in the municipal plan itself. There are no actual guidelines or provisions in the zoning bylaw. So we need to bring something into the bylaw to recognize the decisions that the Planning Advisory Committee have made. So this is basically the framework, the starting point. As things change, as we get a better feel for maybe housing changes or the needs of the community, these amendments can always be reviewed and adjusted accordingly. And as I mentioned, in 2023, there will be an interim review of our municipal plan, which will actually trigger, again, another review of the zoning bylaw, as well as making sure that the municipal plan and the zoning bylaw align with the strategic plan that was just adopted by council. So there'll be an opportunity in 2023 to actually have a review of those provisions again. So thank you, Your Worship.
I appreciate that, because I think it's really important with our housing that we get some diverse housing and different ideas, and really get into our bylaws and zoning bylaws when it comes to our housing. My last question has to do with the hold harmless agreement, and I want to, I know it's a legal matter, so I would assume the question I have, is it a blanket hold harmless agreement, or does every property have a specialized hold harmless agreement according to their land? And do we have a lawyer develop that? How does that whole process work? Thank you.
Thank you, through your worship. So the whole harmless agreement is, can be applied on a case-by-case basis. There are standard provisions in the whole harmless agreement. Those standard provisions relate to recognizing the need to provide unobstructed and emergency access for emergency service providers at all time, reasonably. So there are a number of standard provisions that appear in all of the whole harmless agreements, and there are opportunities to add an additional criteria or conditions based on, as a case-by-case, based on the property and what the development is. They're drafted by our town solicitor. They come to the planning department to be reviewed to make sure they align with any variances that are granted by the planning advisory committee. The property owner has an opportunity to review that. The property owner has an opportunity to sit with their legal counsel to review. And in some cases, there is communication between both the town solicitor and their legal counsel or solicitor to iron it out. And ultimately, it's signed and registered against the property through Service New Brunswick. So it is case by case, and there is a process that we follow.
Thank you. I'll just go back to Deputy Mayor Scryer. We are asking for first and second reading this evening, so if you had any comments that you wanted to be addressed as far as changes, then I would suggest it be done tonight.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, for that. So I do, on the garden suites, there's or coach houses, whichever you would like. I do have a question. It says if there's an accessory dwelling unit currently on the land, they won't get a permit. So I'm just wondering what would be considered an accessory dwelling unit that they would currently already have?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. An accessory dwelling unit is defined in our current zoning bylaw as being very similar to a basement apartment, which is basically 75% of the basement floor area that is currently being occupied and used as a dwelling unit. So the intent is to provide another dwelling unit on the property, which can be either in the main dwelling as an accessory dwelling unit, a basement apartment, or separate somewhere else on the property, preferably to the rear of the main dwelling. What we have to look at is once you introduce the main dwelling, an accessory dwelling unit, and now you're introducing a coach home or a garden suite, you essentially have 3 dwelling units on the property, right? Whereas our bylaw and our zoning says an R1 is 1 or 2 units. So when you get into 3 units on a property, you're actually getting into multi-units, then you're getting into a rezoning. So that's the reason that provision currently exists. And you have to look at the impacts of introducing more units onto a residential property in terms of the activity on the property impacts on adjacent property owners as well, and the quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. I will go to Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Colburn, thank you for your presentation. My question is, what is an RU zone, for starters, in the garden suite section?
Through Your Worship, RU is rural zone. So that's lots that have a minimum acreage of 1 acre, 4,000 square meters, or they're on their own septic and well.
Okay, so if, I guess my question is that on lots less than 1,330 square meters in R1, they are permitted in R1 and RU. And then on lots not less than 5,350 square meters on lots in RU zone. So you need an acre and a third or whatever in a rural zone to introduce a garden home or a garden suite. And you need 1,330 square meters in an R1 zone to introduce a garden suite?
That is correct.
I'm just,
Why?
I can't see the difference. I don't understand.
Okay, so through you, your worship, so in an R1 zone, that means that the lot is serviced by municipal sewage and is on their own well. So the current provisions in the bylaw say if you have an accessory dwelling unit, so if that's a basement apartment in your main dwelling, you need a larger lot. So basically what we've done is we've taken the same provisions and applied it to a garden suite, because you're simply having a second dwelling unit on the property. So whether it's in the main dwelling or separate, we've just used that same area. In terms of the rural area, it's governed by the province. So the province requires a minimum of 1 acre or approximately 4,000 square meters to accommodate dwelling, septic field, and well. And it's based on the number of units on the number of bedrooms on the unit. So the minimum when you get into accessory dwelling units is 5,300, I think it is, in 50 square meters. So that's regulated by the province.
Sorry, Your Worship. So where I'm situated, I don't even know what zone I'm in. I have septic, I'm on sewer. I have an acre and a half. So that's why I'm curious. So I'm permitted to have one garden suite on that area where I am?
Through you, your worship, if you exceed the minimum requirement. The other option is you can apply to the province and have what they call a non-conventional septic system. So your typical septic system is a tank and a field, and then you can get into an engineered solution. And if you get into an engineered or non-conventional system, you may be able to have that accommodation on a lot that's smaller than 5,350 square meters. So basically the standard baseline is 5,350 square meters. And if you're using a non-conventional system, if your lot's smaller and you want to look at putting in a engineered system, then obviously it would be a variance to the bylaw to provide for that.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. We'll go back again to Deputy Mayor Scryer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to know why the garden home or the garden suite, coach house, has to be in the rear of the lot of the property. And I guess when I drive around more of the older Quispamsis, you get up into Sherwood Park, and we have a lot of areas that years and years ago, that was all on septic too, so they have large lots there. And a lot of times you see large front yards, which would be adequate space for a garden suite, or to the side, a sideline. So I'm just curious as to why it needs to be in the back. I could see it fitting, quite quaintly, a nice little garden suite in front of the main house, because they're only allowed to be a certain height. There's a height restriction of 5 meters, I think. So I don't understand the reasoning for behind the house.
Mr. Colburn, please.
Through you, your worship. So most of the lots, when you look at their layout, most of the main dwellings are pulled forward. So they're like, in Quispam, most of them are like 7.5 meters if you're on a local street, 25 feet away from the front, which provides you with a larger area in the back, right? So obviously the initial site would be in the back as well. And you also look at the overall impacts on the properties. So if you were sort of basically providing that aesthetics or whatever, so it's actually tucked in behind sort of the main dwelling. So that sort of sets, again, the minimum standards, things we look at. So again, these are guiding principles that say if I'm going to put a garden suite, what I look at, preferably it's in the back. If you come to me and say, well, my lot is this, but I'm longer on that way, can I have a garden suite? Then we would obviously look at it a case-by-case basis, and you apply for a variance. We go through that process. It means there is a potential for it to happen, but the starting point, and again, the guidelines say the preference is in the back, because when you look at the lot layout, most of the area to support it would be in the back of the property. So again, it goes back to a case-by-case. If the need were to arise, we would look at it.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Mr. Colburn? Are there any further questions for Mr. Colburn?
If nobody's gonna ask it.
One more question, Deputy Mayor.
If nobody else has another question, I will ask, and it's on this restriction of the size of the in-law or the garden suite. I think I mentioned before that I find that, you know, things change and clients' needs are changing, our residents' needs. What we might have considered downsizing 5 years ago is altogether different today. It's changing rapidly. And so I see here that the gross floor can't be more than 35% of the main dwelling, or to a maximum of have a gross floor of 35% or less of the main dwelling unit, or a maximum of 100 square meters, which is about 1,000 square feet, something like that. So I guess sort of puts you, if you look at some of our older homes in Quispamsis, like again, I said, if you look at the more developed areas from 25, 30, 35 years ago, those houses are probably smaller than what we are seeing built today. So they're sort of at a disadvantage because they can only build a garden suite of a certain size, whereas compared to a larger home, except they can't exceed the 100 or 1,000 square feet. So I guess I need clarification on that. Is it either or like, is it 35? Is it 35 of the main dwelling or 100 square feet, square meters?
So I think that's up to, through your worship, that's up like to the maximum. So it's would be whatever the lesser is.
So if my house was
because what it
only,
is, the way we look at it is the main dwelling, the intent is the accessory dwelling units, or the garden suite, sorry, would be a smaller living unit for people, as we mentioned, are downsizing. So we're looking at it being the lesser of. So if you take your main dwelling, whatever that lesser calculation is, 35% up to a maximum of basically 1,000 square feet, I think it is, or whatever that 100 square meters is.
of the lesser. So if my house is only 1,000 square feet and I want to build something for my parents, it can only be, it can't, it has to be 35% of the 1,000 square feet of my original home.
Yep.
And that's where I find it a little, you know, depending on the size of your home, you get to build a bigger in-law suite than somebody else. And so I just wonder about that, if there's something there that maybe we could tweak a little bit. But I know we're just going through the process, but I would like to see that changed a little bit, so that, and maybe some input as to what is it that people that are downsizing really do want, like what square footage are they looking for? I know everybody's different, but there must be some averages out there of what that looks like.
So through your worship, when we brought these provisions forward, we did reach out to other jurisdictions and see what their starting point was. So we felt that what was brought forward was reasonable based on the information and where we reached out to. Again, there's opportunities to continue to review the needs of the community. And while we always go back to, there is the opportunity for a case by case. So if somebody comes in and says, I recognize you have these provisions in your bylaw, however, this is kind of my need. Can I go before the Planning Advisory Committee perhaps to seek a variance? That opportunity is there as well. We go through the process, and so the opportunity is there to obviously look at things on a case by case. But that is sort of the starting point, the framework, to which we will move forward on. That's our intent, but there's always an opportunity to review. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. If there are no further questions, I believe there is a recommendation for Councillor Olson, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'd move first reading be given to proposed zoning bylaw amendment number 38-41, introducing development permits to close the gap in the town's permitting processes created by the new Building Code Administration Act, and also to implement housekeeping items recommended by the planning staff to strengthen in the zoning bylaw, including provisions surrounding cannabis regulation, garden suite provisions, lot boundary verification, and provisions for surface water drainage, and provisions for elevations of new structures and residential driveways.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Miller. On the question? Seeing there are none, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Looking for the second reading, please. Councillor Bigger, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move second reading be given to proposed zoning bylaw amendment number 038-41, introducing development permits to close the gap in the town's permitting processes created by the new Building Code Administration Act, and also to implement housekeeping items recommended by the planning staff to strengthen the zoning bylaw, including provisions surrounding cannabis regulation, garden suite provisions, lot boundary verification, provisions for surface water drainage, and provisions for elevations of new structures and residential driveways.
Thank you, Councillor Bigger. It's been moved by Councillor Bigger, seconded by Councillor Olson. On the question, please. Councillor Olson, are you okay?
Thanks.
Please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Moving on to item number 7, minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, Your Worship, move that minutes be approved as prepared.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Bigger, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Unfinished business. Item 8A, Dangerous and Unsightly Premises Bylaw number 039, Invoicing Discrepancy, 109 Parkside Drive Road. Staff report from Bylaw Enforcement Officer Trevor Murray, which was in your package. Looking for a motion on this. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd move the council authorize payment of an additional $1,000 plus HST to Atlantic Precast Concrete Limited as recommended by the bylaw enforcement officer, resulting in a new total cost of $8,500 plus tax to ensure the town's invoicing to the province represents the actual costs expended on remediation of this property pursuant to the Dangerous and Unsightly Premises Bylaw number 039.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. It's been moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Olson. On the question. There are none. Please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number 9, correspondence. I don't see any here. Item number 10, bylaws. 10A, bylaw number 063, a bylaw of the municipality of Quispamsis respecting tourism accommodation levy. Councillor Donovan.
Whereas a notice has been published on the Town of Quispamsis website pursuant to Section 15.3 and 15.4 of the Local Governance Act, summarizing the content of proposed bylaw number 063, a bylaw of the municipality of Quispamsis relating to a tourism accommodation levy for the Town of Quispamsis. And whereas the proposed bylaw would allow for the collection of a 3.5% levy against the purchase price charged to any guest of any premises operated to provide for remuneration, temporary sleeping accommodations for the public for a continuous period not exceeding 32 days, and including hotels, motels, inns, bed and breakfasts, resorts, hostels, and campgrounds, and any other facility which contains rooms offered as accommodations or rental units as lodging, and whereas proposed bylaw number 063 received first and second reading at the December 6th, 2022 regular meeting, be it therefore resolved that third and final reading be proposed or be given to proposed bylaw number 063, a bylaw of the municipality of Quispamsis relating to a tourism accommodation levy in the town of Quispamsis.
It's been moved by Councillor Donovan, seconded by Councillor Olson. Is that what we had to do with that? Okay. On the question, please. Councillor Olson, did you have a comment on that?
No, thanks.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Scryer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was reading with interest today about this tourism levy that goes to Envision St. John, and that it's not considered as part of the City of St. John's contribution. So I would assume that would be the same for us, like we already give to Envision, so, and this wouldn't be calculated as something that over and above that we give to Envision. That's my first question, and my second question with this is, right now, we only have one hotel in Quispamsis that will now charge a 3.5% levy. If we have more development, more people will be charged, more commercial establishments will be charged this. Once our contract is up with Envision or goes up for renewal, does this provision get renewed again? Is it an evergreen type of contract, or do we get to revisit this bylaw that our money will actually go there?
Mr. Kennedy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Deputy Mayor. I'll start with question number 2 first. The provincial government a couple of years ago, under pressure and constant requests from Union of Municipalities and the Cities Association, allowed municipalities to move to this accommodation levy if they so choose. As part of the members agreement with Envision that was struck a couple of years ago, one of the lines in that agreement was that the municipalities who are members, St. John, Granby, Westfield, Hampton, Rothsay, and Quispamsis, would implement a municipal accommodation levy in their individual municipalities by December 31st, 2022. The city has done that quite some time ago, and the other ones are moving toward doing that right now as well. So the bylaw itself is different from the members agreement with Envision in terms of if Envision were to disappear for whatever reason at whatever point, and nobody envisions that that's going to happen, pardon the pun, the municipal accommodation levy would stay until the council of the day decided to rescind that bylaw. And obviously at that point, the funding would stay with the municipality in theory. What complicates that matter is the business of the new local governance reform that's been imposed on everyone through the provincial government, which now mandates the Regional Service Commission, all 12 of them across the province, to provide economic development and tourism initiatives for the region. And this sort of dovetails with the Deputy Mayor's first question, Your Worship, in that the talk about St. John's funding that's been quite public over the last little while, and how, depending on who you speak with, some people say that the funding that comes through the accommodation levy in the city of St. John should be counted when someone is tallying up how much St. John contributes to Envision and the economic development and tourism initiatives in the region. And then there are others who would argue the opposite, that it shouldn't be included because the tourism levy in St. John going back to 2007 or 2008, which was then a voluntary levy, was administered by the St. John Hotel Association, and that's when Discover St. John was originally struck, and all that city funding went to that organization as the local destination marketing organization. So it never really stayed with the city. So one could argue that it's somewhat disingenuous for the city to suggest that that money that they've been giving all along to tourism endeavors in the region and had never included that in their overall funding envelope. And now some people are. So that sort of confuses things when you come out in the public and say, well, we're getting the short end of the Envision stick because we're contributing more than our share. So long rambling answer is that we receive a 5% administrative fee off of whatever it is that we are going to receive. And obviously at this point in time, it's only going to be from the Quality Inn Amsterdam on Millennium Drive. But that money that goes into regional tourism endeavors, which presently is administered by Envision, does not go against the money that we are paying to Envision right now as per the members agreement. So it's over and above that, but it's certainly a much smaller number than the city of St. John sees go from their tourism levy towards regional tourism initiatives. So your worship had written a letter to the minister probably in early fall asking that the tourism levy from the city of St. John stay with the Regional Economic Development Agency. So I think it would be difficult for us to, at this point in time, use St. John's argument and say, well, this is over and above what we're contributing, because really it's, from our perspective at the staff level, it really has no impact on us because it's money that's coming in, for the most part, from people who don't live in Quispamsis who are here, and it's a standard item that one sees on their hotel bill pretty much anywhere you go now. So we're just sort of catching up to pretty much everywhere else at this stage of the game. But in terms of, is this over and above what we are contractually obligated to contribute to Envision through the members agreement that expires on December 31st, 2025? The answer to that, which is a simple answer after a very long convoluted response from me, is yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, and thank you for the question. And certainly clarity, information, knowledge, education, it makes it more clear and helps those who are ill-informed, certain people that have been wanting the levy in St. John to go towards their total of contribution funding towards Envision. This certainly helps to explain why it does not. So certainly appreciate that. Thank you. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Down to item number 11, 11A, new business, appointment of planning director, new requirement under Local Governance Act. Presentation by Municipal Planning Officer, Mr. Dwight Coburn. Welcome back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening again. It's been a while. Hope you're well. Thank you, Your Worship. Deputy Mayor, councillors, staff. I feel like I'm hogging the floor. Local Governance Reform Planning Director. So a short, quick presentation regarding the appointment of a planning director to give you some backgrounds as to the why, where, how we need to move forward. Again, this is something that's been brought forward through the Local Governance Reform, and it's impacting, obviously, even though we weren't directly impacted with respect to changing of boundaries and becoming an entity and then getting a new name, we are getting impacted through different avenues in this regard. So the presentation will cover the current planning and development services, local governance reform, the land use pillar component of it and the new requirements, and steps we need to take to bring into requirements. So first of all, current planning and development services. So again, as mentioned earlier in my previous presentation, our authority for land use planning and development services comes from the Community Planning Act and the Building Code Administration Act. The Community Planning Act in its current form states in section 10(1)B that the municipality may appoint a person as a planning officer, and then that planning officer acts as the development officer. That is what council has done. Okay, I am in that capacity as an appointment through council as being a planning officer. So our current services and personnel would include, in terms of planning, a development officer and planning technologist, myself and Jennifer Jarvis, and then Chrissy Scott as our GIS side of things for planning. Our town solicitor, which provides legal guidance and interpretation of the Community Planning Act and any other land use documents that we have. Our building inspectors that administer the building bylaw and issue building permits. And then obviously we would engage professional planners on a need-by-need or case-by-case basis with respect to changes to the municipal plan as they have to be reviewed and signed off by a registered planner when you introduce new municipal plans once every 10 years as it currently exists. So as we currently sit, we are meeting the requirements of the Community Planning Act and the province. What local governance reform has done in terms of the land use pillar is introduced what we call minimum requirements. So as I indicated or shown in my last slide, there's a number of minimum land use planning and development services that are being brought forward by the province, and that's being brought forward in terms of the interest or in the aspect of consistency with the creation of these new local governments, and what they wanted to achieve was the consistency across the province. So by doing that, the regional service commissions and local governments will be required to meet a minimum standard for land use planning and development services and ensure that only certified land use planners are approving planning documents. So in terms of any land use documents that get created or amended, before they're submitted to the province and being registered, they have to be reviewed by a certified planner, and before the province will accept them. So the Community Planning Act and Regional Service Act will be amended to require the provincial planning director, regional service commission planning director, local government planning director to be a registered professional planner to ensure a minimum level of qualification and standard across the province, and require all land use plans and zoning documents to be endorsed by the registered professional planner before being submitted to the minister for approval. That is the item that we're trying to address through this process of appointing a planning director. So this indicates the current minimum requirements. As it currently sits, the services that are required we are providing. So in terms of planning advisory committee, in terms of creating municipal plans, we have zoning bylaws, we have background documents. We've gone through all those processes and we're providing those level of services. As in my previous presentation and the zoning bylaw amendment, we're bringing forth development permits to address the gap that's been created. So we're addressing that issue. The item that's we need to address is the certified planner to endorse documents prior to submitting to the province. So there was a checklist that was sent out from the government in August, I think it was September, that basically took this minimum level of land use planning and development services and said, how are you going to comply? So the response that we provided back was that we have a development officer, we have a building inspector, we're providing those level of services. We do not have on staff at this point in time a registered planner. So the option was to either engage the services of a consultant to provide that service and then provide that information to the province once the planning director was appointed. So to become a registered professional planner, you have to be a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners, or the MCIP, so you get that designation, and you also become a registered planner. To become a registered planner, it's a candidate application and acceptance process. You have to have a minimum of 5 years of planning experience to actually apply to the association to be accepted as a candidate. Once you're accepted as a candidate, then you have to have 2 years of mentorship program, okay? Which means that you're under the guidance of an existing certified planner who certifies that you are meeting the requirements and engaged in planning activities. Then you have to write a professional, ethics exam, and at which point, if you pass the exam and you meet all the criteria, you become a registered professional planner. So it takes, in essence, from where we are right now, 2 years. With the initial timelines of local government's reform, we had anticipated that staff itself would meet that criteria. As we're all more than well aware, local governance reform is moving fast and things are changing. So this became a higher priority in terms of having a registered professional planner to meet the minimum requirements of the province and the legislative changes. So myself and Jennifer Jarvis are currently moving forward with getting that certification, but in the interim, we need to comply with the provincial requirements. I reached out to a number of consulting firms locally. When I say locally, just not in the St. John area, but across the province. And what I found was the number of consulting firms that actually have registered professional planners on staff are not as popular as one might think. So what we found was locally, and Dillon Consulting was the one that is currently sort of very active in that particular area. They're providing services to the town of Hampton, Sussex, Granby, Westfield, as well as they do some work for the city of St. John, as well as the Regional Service Commission itself. And they have been undertaken, and they've done the municipal plans for Hampton and Woodstock and the zoning bylaws and those types of things. So we reached out, and Dillon provided an offer of service in terms of a planning director as well as professional planning services. And they have recommended that Mr. Stephen Stone, who's a registered professional planner, would be the appropriate person in terms of being a planning director at this stage, moving forward to meet the requirements of the Community Planning Act and the provincial changes under local governance reform. So the offer of service basically is a registered professional planner who would be on an annual retainer at a cost of approximately $4,000 with an option to renew on an annual basis. And then they would also provide as needed contract with a total upset fee of approximately $20,000 exclusive of HST in terms of if there are changes or zoning bylaw amendments, municipal plan amendments that need to be reviewed. If they have to bring in additional staff from Dillon to assist, then obviously that would be in that as needed contract. Funds were allocated, or funds are available in the 2023 budget to cover that cost in terms of 2023. As I mentioned, it's an annual renew, so something we can review as we go through the process in 2023. Day-to-day planning and development services will remain as they currently are. So ultimately what happens is, if we were to move forward with this, council would appoint Mr. Stone as a planning director. Mr. Stone as a planning director simply appoints backwards and says the current planning staff of Quispamsis will be carrying out the day-to-day operations, administration of bylaws, processing of applications and permits and all that type of things. If there's an amendment that comes up, this is where the planning director essentially comes in, making sure we're following the requirements of the Community Planning Act, we're engaging the residents, we're meeting all the requirements, and they sign off on it. So in essence, it's something that we have been using our town solicitor for as guidance, and his very vast array of knowledge has been absolutely critical as we move through some of these processes. Unfortunately, he is not a registered planner, so he can't sign off on it, so we need that person to ultimately do that to meet the requirements. So in summary, Quispam currently planning and development services, we meet the existing provincial requirements. The introduction of new land use planning requirements for local government under local government's reform requires the appointment of a planning director to certify land use planning documents. Dillon Consultant has submitted an offer of service to provide professional planning services with Mr. Stephen Stone to be retained as a planning director. Motion of council is required to accept the offer of service and appoint Stephen Stone as planning director for the town. And as I mentioned, day-to-day planning development services will be administered by the current staff with delegation from the planning director. Open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Are there any questions? Councillor Luck, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have to ask, I'm just, again, Mr. Stone sounds like, a valuable asset to the town, but I think we also have some very valuable assets on staff. And it sounds like we're still gonna do all the work, and to tick a box, we need to now give him the sign-off power, because someone in government has now told us we need to do something without any type of grandfathering, like to say, okay, within 2 years, you need to have this in place. Like, I guess it just surprises me, because we wouldn't be the only one in this situation. So there was no like wiggle room or grandfathering in to say you have some time to adapt to this. Like, this guy's going to potentially make a fortune, because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of registered planners out there. It just seems quite backwards in terms of, I know, moving forward. And I think it's great to have someone, kind of oversee some of the things. And it's wonderful to hear that we're looking in-house to kind of get that credentialing. I'm just surprised, well, I shouldn't be surprised, but I am surprised that they didn't give any leeway in terms of how quickly we have to implement this.
Thank you, Councillor Luck. Mr. Colburn.
Through you, Your Worship, thank you, Councillor Luck. That question came from staff here to the planning director of the province, and it is no grandfather clause. This is the requirement. It's been enacted, and you are now required to meet those provisions, and this is where we are. It would have come from the process of the fact that the number of entities have dropped significantly, so now you have entities where these services are required, and obviously, as I mentioned, we're moving fast through this process, so the options were there that you'd have to at least reach out to professional planners to provide to meet the minimum requirements. So yes, from a planning perspective, staff are moving forward to get that accreditation, but I do concur and believe, as Councillor Locke has indicated, it is a valuable asset, and I think Mr. Stone will actually assist us through that process more than just simply ticking a box. So I think it's a step, even though it's moved quickly, we have to comply. I think there's also some other benefits that we will actually from the process.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Luck, and thank you for the response, Mr. Colburn. Deputy Mayor Scryer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Colburn, for your information here. For the planning director, I thought when we were talking, had several conversations around the council table about the service, Regional Service Commission, that I know land planning, zoning was a big concern. They said for rural areas didn't have it. I always got the feeling that we were good, that we had the appropriate staffing for this. And so I guess get to my question. Is it a one-year contract? I'm seeing 20,000 and another 4,000, so it's a $4,000 stipend, or not stipend, but retainer, and then up to $20,000 for his services for projects that may require his. Do you feel that that's sufficient? That that's the proper amount of? I know we've gone through a lot of development lately, and how do you feel about that?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Scryer. Mr. Colburn.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I believe it's reasonable what's been put forward. Obviously, it's a professional. He's a professional planner with 10 years, I think in excess of 10 years of experience. So when you look at 4,000 in terms of a retainer, I think that's reasonable. Again, the key note is a lot of the day-to-day a lot of the day-to-day services and those types of things will still be at a staff level. So it's simply reaching out to make sure in terms of review, making sure we're in line. So a lot of the things like we're bringing forward zoning bylaw amendments, all those types of things will still be driven and generated by staff. It's simply going back to the consultant to make sure that we haven't missed anything and that we're doing everything in accordance with the province and the requirements. So I think it's reasonable. And to finish that, it is annual. So at the end of 2023, we look at the volume of work that's been done, and if we feel it's too much, then it goes the other way. So, but yes, it is an annual contract we renew.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Moving to Councillor Olson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Colburn, for your exclamation of all of this, explanation, I should say. You advised that the Quispamsis planning staff will be undertaking MCIP certification. How long does that take?
Through your worship, so the minimum, I have the minimum of 5 years. Jennifer Jarvis has the 5 years, so it's basically now we can start the 2-year mentoringship program. The applications have been submitted, so it's a matter of getting accepted, and then it's the 2-year, so minimum, we're at 2 years. Hopefully, it's not longer than that.
So once that certification is received, then this position would no longer be required?
So through you, your worship, if once we have the designation on staff, then it would be a motion of council to appoint a staff person as a planning director. And because that's an annual renewal contract, then we will look at where we are in the timeline and take the appropriate course of action at that point in time.
Okay. This is a huge undertaking for municipalities right across this province. I wonder how this is being accepted by the other regional service commissions and what progress they're going to be looking at or timeline involved to even get near where we've achieved already. I think we've taken a lot of pride in what we felt were really good positions of planning and bylaws and all this stuff, and now the province is dictating these new standards that everyone has to adopt. And I'm just wondering how long is that going to be taking?
So through you, your worship, to Councillor Olson, so some of the larger, obviously municipalities have on staff, registered professional planners. Some of the local governments have been relying on the regional service commissions to provide the service. In some of those cases, they have development officers or planning officers like we have as a local government, and they still have to reach out to consultants to provide that registered professional planner. Some of the regional service commissions do have registered planners on staff, so it varies. To my knowledge, based on the timelines in terms of the new entities, they're obviously undertaking the development of municipal plans and rural plans and zoning bylaws, and I think the timeline that's been provided is up to, I believe, 2027 to have all that stuff in place. But however, they have to have the staff and these registered planners on as part of the process up front to guide through the actual development of these bylaws.
Thank you. And just with that, I know in our RSC, there is a planning officer, Nick Cameron, and he does call upon Dylan from time to time. So that is already in place with the RSC. Moving on to Councillor Bigger, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm prepared to make a motion that Council appoint Mr. Stephen Stone of Dillon Consulting Limited as the planning director for the town of Quispamsis on a retainer basis for the 2023 year for an annual cost of $4,000 with the option to renew at year end for 1 additional year.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Bigger, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question. Councillor Olson, did you have anything further?
No, thank
The
you.
light was on, sorry. Councillor Donovan, please.
Thank you. I'm glad that we're looking at getting this, or getting you and Ms. Jarvis certified. Just a question because I'm curious. How did we include the education for you and Ms. Jarvis into our budget? Like is it expensive? I'd assume, like to do the course, or I assume it isn't free. I'm just curious.
Mr. Colburn, please.
Through you, your worship, to Councillor Donovan. So yeah, the actual cost and part of that education is included in our budget. In our budgets, we provide an educational allotment, so that would be under that provisions in the bylaw, in the budget, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Bigger, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question, please vote now. Motion carries 7-0. Item 11B, Building Inspector Appointment, Staff Report from Director of Engineering and Works. Mr. Logier, please. It's showing here that you're on, Mr. Logier. Little technical difficulty here. Would you like to speak into?
Thank you, Worship. I've never been one to worry about a mic. The province, again, we're looking at changes to the Provincial Community Planning Act, as was mentioned earlier by our Municipal Planning Officer. One of those changes involves the introduction of the Building Code Administration Act and changes to the Local Governance Act. And as we review our staffing and our staffing levels and the levels of expertise we have in our staff, we felt that it was an appropriate time to create, to promote our existing building inspector to the position of the building inspector for the town, the chief building inspector. I've been the chief building inspector for the town for almost 20 years now, dual role as a director of engineering works, until we had appropriate staff in place and the resources to deal with technical issues. Now, with the changes to the code, with the changes to the provincial legislation, and the ability of the appropriate technical staff, we're making recommendation to council that we now appoint Mr. Trevor Murray as our chief building inspector and bylaw enforcement for the town of Quispamsis. Mr. Murray is a highly qualified individual. He's been working for the town for 13 years as our building inspector. He has impeccable credentials technically for the building industry. He's a subject matter expert that's been consulted to across the province and beyond. So we feel that from a alignment of duties, from a succession planning perspective, it's appropriate at this stage to appoint Mr. Murray as the building inspector. In doing so, that would require my resignation as the building inspector. I would retain, obviously the director of engineering and works roles, but it's basically separating that particular duty off of my current day-to-day activities. There are many benefits to this alignment, because as the building inspector now, he would have the authority to sign all appropriate documentation, permits, stop work orders, things of that nature. Anything that requires planning review, permit through the permitting process. It makes it a little bit more efficient, so that rather than creating a document, running it through me, if I am in the office or I'm away at a particular conference or whatever, or on vacation, now that streamlines with Mr. Murray as proposed under this recommendation. So those are the parameters that we're making these recommendations to council. We trust that is acceptable to you all, and we look forward to, and Mr. Murray and I look forward to the challenges and working with the building permitting process for the town as we take this to the community of choice, where most people really want to come and build a community. So, Your Worship, if there are any questions or any comments.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? We'll go to a motion first. Councillor Luck.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that the town of Quispamsis accept the resignation of Gary Lozier as the Chief Building Inspector and Bylaw Enforcement Officer effective January 1st, 2023. And further, the town of Quispamsis appoint Trevor Murray as the Chief Building Inspector and Bylaw Enforcement Officer effective January 1st, 2023, under the provisions of the Province of New Brunswick's Building Code Administration Act and the Local Governance Act.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Luck, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, not so much on the question, just a comment. I'd like to extend our thanks to Mr. Logier for the years and years of services acting as the chief building inspector and bylaw enforcement officer. And we know you're not far away, and but our heartfelt gratitude for everything you've done over the last many, many years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Scryer. On the question, it's been moved by Councillor Locke, seconded by Councillor Donovan. Please vote now. Motion carried 7-0, and a congratulations out to Mr. Trevor Murray as well. And moving on, item 11C, projected general operating surplus and transfers to and from reserve funds. Staff report from the town treasurer, which were sent out today and yesterday. Okay. Ms. Brandon, did you have anything
Thank you,
further?
Your Worship. So I will start going through our projected general operating surplus and transfers. And so you'll notice I've brought my little magic 8-ball tonight because administration has been working over the last few weeks to try and do all of our projections to see where we are going to end up for the year. And as our monthly financials have indicated since probably the first set of financials that we did, probably back in March, that we do have a deficit this year in the organization. And again, it relates to some significant snow fall weather events back in the early part of 2022. So when we've kind of gone through and magic 8-balled everything and tried to, capture everything that's going to be transacted over the next few months, we have estimated that our revenue will be over by about $266,000. Some of this is related to some additional grants that we've received that weren't budgeted, as well as some increased revenue in our community services department. So that's our revenue, 266. Our expenses are also over budget. We have some savings in our general government of about $316,000. Also some savings in our protective services. Again, these are just compared to budget of about $62,000. We do see overages in our transportation, environmental development, and community services. And again, the transportation is related to the winter storm events, increased fuel costs, and really just increased costs as compared to our budget in almost all areas of our business. So that's kind of kept us quite busy this year in making sure that we're, still documenting everything, projecting, doing adjustments. And you would have seen a lot of our staff reports that came forward to council where we would be asking and indicating that any sort of extra costs would come either from projected surplus or from our operating or capital reserves. So that definitely was the theme that we saw this year. So before our subtotal of expenses is over budget by $103,000. We have some recommended transfers that are going through for budgeted projects that were not completed or won't be completed by the end of the year. So what we want to be able to do is move the remainder of that money into our reserve so that in 2023, when we see those expenses come through, we can bring that revenue in so we don't see an impact on our 2023 financials. So we have operating carry forwards of about $124,180. And then also on our capital side, we have a few projects there that either with supply chain issues or different items that are delayed that will be then completed in 2023. So again, we want to bring that money over so that things that we've already budgeted for and taxed for don't then impact our following year. So that's $176,000. So our projected deficit at the end of 2022 is about $137,180. I'm also recommending then that we transfer from our general operating reserve, and again, that is why we have a general operating reserve, is for years like this when, all the planning, all the, best work in the world sometimes can't plan for the unknowns, and we've seen a lot of that with our inflation and increases this year. So I am recommending a transfer of $150,000 from their operating reserve to offset our 2022 deficit. That would leave us a net projected operating budget surplus of $13,000, which is not very much on a $28 million budget. So again, the details are in the staff report. We've tried to kind of go through, analyze everything, and there are 6 motions that would be required at this time for us to close off our 2022 year end, and I will take any questions at this time as well.
Okay, so the first one, could we have a motion on the $124,180? Have the motion read, please. Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Worship. Be it resolved that $124,180 be transferred from the general operating fund to the general operating reserve fund for 2022 operating project carry forwards.
It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Scryer. On the question. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say quickly, kudos to our treasurer. I'm really amazed at how fine-toothed a comb you can go through this stuff with. And we're very fortunate to have somebody so adept and so skilled with this. So just want to say thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you for that. On the question, please vote now. Deputy Mayor. In favor? She's in favor. Motion carried 7-0. Looking for a motion for the item number 2. Please read the motion. Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Worship. Be it resolved that $176,000 be transferred from the general operating fund to the general capital reserve fund for 2022 capital project carry forwards.
It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Bigger. On the question. Please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Moving to item number 3, $150,000. Councillor Donovan, please.
Be it resolved that $150,000 be transferred from the general operating reserve fund to the general operating fund to fund the estimated 2022 deficit.
It's been moved by Councillor Donovan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Scryer. On the question. Please vote now. Motion carries 7-0. Item number 4. Councillor Olson.
Be it resolved that $65,000 be transferred from the general operating reserve fund to the general operating fund to fund 2021 operating carry forward projects completed in 2022.
Looking for a seconder on that, please. Councillor Miller. It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Miller. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number 5. Please read the motion. Councillor Donovan.
Be it resolved that $212,340 be transferred from the general capital reserve fund to the general capital fund to fund 2021 capital carry for 2022.
It's been moved by Councillor Donovan, seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor Scryer. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. And finally, item number 6, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Your Worship. Be it resolved that $428,264 be transferred from the General Capital Reserve Fund to the General Capital Fund to fund part of Fire Station Number 2 renovations.
It's been moved by Councillor Miller, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question, please vote now. Deputy Mayor? You're good. Motion carried 7-0. Item 11D, 2022 projected utility operating surplus, transfers to reserve fund. Staff report from the treasurer. Ms. Brandon.
So again, we have our two funds, so we need to handle all of our transactions separately. In our utility operating fund, we do have a projected operating surplus of about $57,000. And we do have quite a number of capital projects that are ongoing. A lot of these projects are multi-year projects, so a lot of times we'll budget for them, move them to reserve, and fund when completed. For cash flow purposes, again, we do try to fund some of the bigger ones, like our utility building and different things like that. So we are recommending the 4 adjustments here, and again, they're all detailed out within the staff report. This is the one that was just late given to you today, so I will kind of run through that. So we are seeing revenue over budget of about $75,000, and that is related to the increased residential sewer user fees, some increased connection fees, as well as some of the interest and interest on overdue accounts as well. We are seeing that a little bit higher as well. But we are seeing some decreases on our water sales. So they kind of net together for that $75,000. As indicated in one of our monthly financials, we did have some emergency repairs for a water pump down at the Down East. That totaled about $51,000, and we are able to fund that through the operating, so there won't be a reserve transfer for that. And then we were also able to, we had an old plow that just kind of happened in the last week, I think, and we have enough money to actually fund and get that plow so that truck can get back out on the road as well. We are recommending that we do the budget. We do budget to move items to capital reserve, so we are recommending that that budgeted transaction go through. And then on the expenses and carry forward pieces, we have, like I said, some big year-over-year projects. So we had our water tower rehabilitation that we had an original budget for. We had come back to council for some additional money. It's pretty much done, but we're going through and requesting some funds for that. The utility building, so we originally had about $700,000. We've previously funded $535,000 earlier this year, again for cash flow purposes. So we're recommending that that 165 transfer go through. And then we had an alternate energy study and 2 vehicles. So that's the $905,319 transferred from the utility capital reserve to the capital fund so that we can fund those projects. And the other piece I mentioned on the utility building. So there are 4 motions to close off this part of the utility year end.
Thank you, Ms. Brent, and I'm looking for a motion on item number 1, please. Councillor Olson.
Be it resolved that $282,653 be transferred from the utility operating fund to the utility capital reserve fund as per the 2022 budget.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Bigger. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number 2, please read the motion. Counselor Donovan.
Be it resolved that $493,000 be transferred from the Utility Operating Fund to the Utility Capital Reserve Fund for future use on 2022 capital projects carried forward.
It's been moved by Counselor Donovan, seconded by Counselor Olson. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number 3. Counselor Bigger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Be it resolved that $905,319.92 be transferred from the Utility Capital Reserve Fund to the Utility Capital Fund for 2021 carry-forward projects and 2022 additional approved capital costs.
Thank you. It's been moved by Counselor Bigger, seconded by Counselor Miller. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number 4. Counselor Donovan, please.
And finally, be it resolved that $237,000, $237,139.94 be transferred from the Utility Capital Reserve Fund to the Utility Capital Fund for the utility building that went over budget in 2022.
It's been moved by Counselor Donovan. I'm looking for a seconder, please. Counselor Miller. It's been moved by Counselor Donovan, seconded by Counselor Miller. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number E, 2022, transfers to and from the Utility Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund. Ms. Brandon, did you want to speak to that?
Thank you, through your worship. So this is, in essence, kind of our restricted reserve fund that needs to be used for specific things. So we always budget for a budget transfer that's must be set aside as per conditions of a grant, as well as we had some projects related to some of this utility equipment that we're able to pull from the reserve to fund those projects. So this is the last reserve motion for this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Brandon. I'm looking for a motion. Counselor Donovan.
Be it resolved that $46,837 be transferred from the 2022 Utility Operating Fund to the Utility Capital Replacement Reserve Fund to pay for future costs of replacement of capital items for the wastewater system upgrades.
Thank you. It's been moved by Counselor Donovan, seconded by Counselor Thompson. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0. Item number 12, reports. Oh, that's another one. I guess my machine didn't refresh. Counselor Donovan.
Be it resolved that $30,602.57 be transferred from the Utility Capital Replacement Reserve Fund, which is a long name, to the 2022 Utility Operating Fund to pay for the Longwood Treatment Plant Aerator Project and the Longwood Roof.
Thank you. It's been moved by Counselor Donovan, seconded by Counselor Miller. On the question, Counselor Miller.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, clarification to our treasurer, because if I look at the first motion, we're going from utility operating fund to transfer to the Utility Capital Replacement Reserve Fund, and then we're doing the Utility Capital Replacement Reserve Fund back to the Utility Operating Fund. I'm just curious why we had to do that twice versus taking it all out at once. And is that the right motion? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Miller. Ms. Brandon?
Through your worship to Councilor Miller, yes, so we always like to segregate what we're taking into the reserve as a transaction and what we're taking it out so that we can identify the purposes. So one is our budgeted transfer that we include, and one is for actual projects that we're taking out, and we always like to segregate those for reconciliation, simplicity, and transparency.
Thank you, Ms. Brandon. On the question, it's been moved by Councillor Donovan, seconded by Councillor Miller. Please vote now. Motion carries 7-0. Now we're down to item number 12, reports. Councillor Olson.
Move we receive and file all reports.
It's been moved to receive and file all reports by Councillor Olson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Scryer. On the question,
On the question.
Deputy Mayor Scryer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to talk about 12D, NB electoral boundaries. We have a report from the Commission on proposed changes, and I would like to see the council have a little bit of a conversation on this either tonight or at a later date. We have certain times that if we're want to put in any ideas to the commission, there's only certain dates that you can put it in. But I've looked at the map, and part of I think even we're not quite sure, but we think our town hall is even in the new riding of Rosse, proposed riding of Rosse. The number of voters that we had in Quispamsis in the last municipal election was 13,654 voters. And they're saying that we must fall, that they can give us a 15% deviation from that number. So I think it would be prudent for us to take maybe a little closer look at this report and think about if we want to present to the commission. It's quite easy. We can either present in person or we can send an email. But as it stands now, what they've done is the boundaries of the more rural part of Quispamsis that was part of Hampton has now come back to Quispamsis, and they've decided to go down the border, Longwood, Hazelton, Edwards, and part of the Pettingill Road. And I'm not sure exactly how many homes on the Pettingill Road fall into that area. So I just, before we receive and file that, I'd sort of maybe take that one out and have a better review of that. If council would like to give a submission to the commission, I'd be willing to help with that.
Are you making a motion, Deputy Mayor?
That is a motion, yes.
Could you repeat your motion, please?
My motion is, my motion would be for council to present to the commission our thoughts and suggestions regarding the new commission boundaries for the town of Quispamsis.
That's going to be done through an email and a hard copy? It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Scryer, seconded by Councillor Donovan. On the question? Yes. Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Worship. I agree with that request. I thought that it was too late since the general meetings of opposition or comments was back in September. But I think if nothing else, I would like to see this clarified and justified to our town that seems to have been put through a shredder. And, we look like we're gathering quite a bit of, or we're recovering quite a bit of the Hampton original, or the past Hampton riding into Quispamsis. But they're cherry-picking streets and areas out of the heart of our community and putting it with another community Doesn't even make sense. I don't think the people that divided it knows where Quispamsis is. So, with all due respect, I think that we should put a little bit more effort into it than just a quick email. I think that if the CAO could do some summarizing of that particular, I'm not suggesting it has to be done tonight, but clarifying so the council can digest it a bit better and then make an educated reply to it. But I agree with that.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our acting CEO, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and of course, I'm pleased to do whatever council directs me to do when it comes to this issue, but I will remind council that we just went through this within the last couple of months when the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission came forward with its initial report, and the City of St. John was outraged that it was divided literally by the harbor, with one side, the west side, going to the Southwest New Brunswick riding, and the east side joining Rothesay and Quispamsis, and a new riding which I believe is called St. John Kennebecasis. And Your Worship, in some media interviews that you did about that, said that this was better for Quispamsis because we have more in common with Rothesay and St. John than certainly we do with the rural areas to our east, and the Fundy Royal riding that goes all the way to Riverview. And I remember when we had that discussion that the question was raised, what are the chances of those boundaries being changed? And I said, despite the great protest by the City of St. John, there was probably very little chance that it was going to be changed. So happy to do whatever council wants us to do in regards to the provincial boundaries, but I would caution council, sort of the same caveat that I gave when we were discussing the federal boundaries, that getting this changed is extremely difficult because of all the dominoes that have to fall. If we were to come forward to say that we want Quispamsis to be one riding, it's too big based on the electoral quotient, and I believe even if you go with the deviation that they can do, it's still too big after that. But to go back to my original comment about the comments that you were making, Your Worship, in the media on the federal boundaries, I think these boundary changes, although it's somewhat, perhaps nonsensical isn't the appropriate word to use, but it's somehow difficult to justify why the Rothesay boundary comes down the Vincent Road and then just stops at Edwards, and why it includes Millennium Drive and Hazelton and Longwood, and why it also includes the land on which we're sitting tonight. Although I suspect if that's something that council really wanted to push, that would be one that would be a win we could probably get, because putting Landing Court into the Quispamsis riding, the newly proposed Quispamsis riding, would not impact anything else because there are no houses on Landing Court, so that wouldn't impact the electoral, the number of electors in that riding. So sort of just on the periphery with the discussion tonight, that I would suggest would be something would be an easy win. It's more symbolic just to have the Quispamsis Town Hall and the riding of Quispamsis. But happy to come back with whatever council wants to see. But again, I would use the same caution of a couple of months ago. The chances of this being changed are not good, practically zero. But I do think that moving the area, Model Farm, Means Cove Beach, those areas back into the Quispamsis riding, the more urban riding, which makes more sense than Hampton. And again, that ties into the comments that we were making publicly, and Your Worship, you were saying is that Quispamsis is more urban and has more in common with our neighbors to the west than we do to the east. So I guess there was some give and take that folks out in that area of Quispamsis get back into the riding, but unfortunately we lose some other ones on the western side of our riding, just simply because, as we talked about, we are a growing community. We're the 6th largest community in New Brunswick, and to expect that the 6th largest community in New Brunswick would have all of its residents in one provincial riding is a tough sell for sure. But again, Your Worship, whatever council wants us to do, happy to come back in our meeting in January with any sort of recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. And yes, I have to agree with you that the federal riding certainly suits our municipality better. As far as the provincial ridings are concerned, I tend to agree with you that because there are no homes on Landing Court, that it would make sense to identify this area as part of Quispamsis. As far as the rest of it is concerned, I believe that will be a rather challenging discussion. Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree that some pieces of that sound good, but what I would like to have is a clear clarification of the logic used to fragment the heart of our community. It's just like somebody put a claw down through our map and just the fingers touched certain areas that they wanted to have relocated or identified. I can understand reducing a certain area, but why don't we put it to the side of our community, adjacent to the community, but not down through the heart of it and then split all over the place. It doesn't even make sense. I can't understand the logic to that, and I think that's worthy of pursuit.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. Deputy Mayor Squire, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I note that there is a schedule for public hearings, so if we did want to attend, we could, besides just an email, we could attend and state our case. And in the meantime, I would really like to see a clear map so we know exactly what portion of the Pettingill Road is going. Is it on the left? Is it on the right? Is it both sides of the Pettingill Road? And because the map that was provided that I could see, it's very hard to zoom in on unless you put it on your phone. It was a little bit better. But I see, I think we need to make a case here and, you know, to keep our town hall in Quispamsis for one thing, but at the same time to keep our community together. I know that, you know, I hear what you're saying to Mr. Kennedy, that it might fall on deaf ears, but I think it's prudent on us to make the case. Thank you.
Thank you, and just in vacating the chair, we had two MLAs represent us, one being our premier, one being Minister Crosman, so we had a little more clout. So we still would have two representatives, MLAs from Quispamsis, and I think that's always good. So we will move forward with your motion, and I will go to next in queue on the question. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as nothing ever comes easily, our next council meeting is scheduled for January 17th. The Southern Electoral District's public presentation is January 13th from 1 to 3 p.m. I don't think it says here where that's going to be yet, but clearly that's before the next council meeting. So if council was looking to direct either you or myself to appear before the commission at that point, I'm a little unclear as to what the ask is actually going to be, and obviously we can't discuss it at the council meeting since that's after that open discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Councillor Donovan, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering if it would be a good idea for us to maybe hold a quick special meeting. I know we have the ability to hold special meetings outside of our regular council meetings, so that might be an option to hold like a short special meeting to sort of sort out how we're moving forward on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Donovan. So the motion on the table, would you mind reading that? Sorry.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Squire and seconded by Councillor Donovan to present to the Commission thoughts and suggestions regarding the electoral boundaries via correspondence drafted by our CAO.
Thank you. Is this on the question?
If I may,
Sure.
Your Worship, there was a question about the map and the details. So there's a description that precedes the actual map that outlines the exact proportions of that stayed along, for example, the Cedar Ridge south side of Street to Pete. I may be able to engage our GIS analysts to actually generate a map that may assist a little clearer what properties affects that if we can't get it directly from the province. So I think we could use the description that's provided and use our GIS system to actually pull the properties and provide you with a little clearer map in a digital form or PDF or something like that. Just putting it out there as an option to assist through the process. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Colburn. Appreciate that. Councillor Miller, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Actually, if you flip 2 more pages, it shows the Rossi map, and it'll show it's got Cedar Ridge. You can see the exact thing, but I guess, Mr. Colburn, were you saying just to see how many people live on those streets, or what was the?
Go ahead, Mr.
Because there's a
Colburn.
map to the next, if you go to the Rossi map, it'll show exactly the street.
Mr. Colburn.
Through you, Your Worship, Councillor Miller. Yeah, it's just that these maps are just the scale of them and the lineage is really thick and black. So just to sort of to scale down and get into the actual properties and how it looks, because I think there was a question whether it's both sides of the Pettingill or one side. Some of those properties, it's going to go to the rear of the property line to actually capture the property itself. So just for clarification to help council.
Thank you again, Mr. Colburn. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried. Sorry, I'm wrong on that.
Yeah.
6-1 with the nay being Councillor Bigger. Did we have the motion for receive and file?
It was not voted on, but we do have the motion moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Schreier.
And that's for receive and file.
Receive and file.
So the motion on receive and file reports, which was moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Schreier. Please vote on that. That was to receive and file.
No, it wasn't voted on. Yep, we're right.
Motion carried 7-0. Item number 13, business arising from committee of the whole. Don't believe there is any. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, council, staff, have a very Merry Christmas. Everybody at home, enjoy your Christmas break. Happy holidays. And I am looking for an adjournment. It's been moved by Councillor Olson, seconded by Councillor Luck. On the question, please vote now. Motion carried 7-0, hoping that you find joy in the end of 2022.